So a little bit about me. As you can see from title on the page, my name's Tim Holmes. I'm one of the senior partners at Sirdar Group and originally from the UK. So that's one of the reasons why I've got this strange accent, and came to South Africa in 1992 working for an IT company. So I was in IT and IT support and the asset management industry for 27 years. And then in 2013, joined Sirdar and focused almost exclusively on training directors and acting as a director, a non-exec director on various boards. So I'm currently chairman of 4 boards across, actually they're all based in Johannesburg, coincidentally. So let's get a little bit of a sense of who we have in the room. So Siraj, if you can, sorry, Sali, if you can please put up, I'm just going to hide video from you. Sali, if you can just please put up the poll so we can just get a sense of who we got in the room. And what I'm really looking for is an understanding of whether you are, and choose all of the apply, shareholder manager, which means you are a shareholder director and manager of the same business. You're just an executive director. You are non-exec director somewhere. Or you're just aspiring to become a non-exec director. So the last part of this program, I'll be giving a lot more detail on our applied directorship program, which is very much geared for those of you who are already non-executive directors or aspiring to become one. But it just as much applies to anybody that's a director, so executive directors as well. Okay, give that a few seconds. Just click on the poll. And we've got 50, 68%, 70%. Come on, last few. So I'm glad to see we've got a good group of aspiring non-exec directors. So a lot of, pretty much everything we'll be covering today will be of interest to you and something that you can hopefully apply and give you confidence when you're going through those applications. For those of you who are already directors of such shareholder managers, executive directors, etc., then yeah, we'll certainly give you some stuff to learn as well. Awesome. So we've got 47% aspiring, 12% who are just non-exec directors, 20 or 30% say that are executive, and 20% shareholder managers. Good spread. Welcome to you all. So I'll just tidy up my screen so I can see where I'm going. Right, so what I'd like you to do is please put in the question and answer box your biggest question regarding organizational culture. So you've come to this webinar for a reason. I'm assuming that you weren't held at gunpoint and told to click on the link. So please put down the question that you would like to have answered by the end of the session so we can make sure that we cover them off. Or if it's just about directorship in general. So certainly for those of you that are aspiring non-exec directors, have you got a particular question about directorship that you'd like me to answer or give you guidance on? So please put those in the Q&A box, and then we'll get to them at the end of this culture session, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail, as I said, about our applied directorship program, and obviously I'll take any questions about any other services that you might be interested in hearing a little bit more about. But the first section is very much focused on education. So maybe just a bit of a backtrack or catch up. I ran a webinar in April. So Sally, if you can please post that link for anybody who's interested in viewing that webinar. It was about strategy and direction. And the reason why we've done a few of these in this particular order is because our methodology at Sirdar is based on these 8 segments. So as a board, we use the governance compass to determine the various key topics that we're going to be going through during the year. And our training programs follow the same pattern. So the applied directorship program has 8 core modules which go through each of these aspects. So as I said, I ran a webinar on strategy and direction a month ago. So yeah, Sally, if you can just put that link, there we go. Thank you very much. It's in the chat box. So if you're interested in watching that one and finding out a little bit more about the strategy and direction piece, then by all means, go and visit that link. Today's session is the next segment around the compass and is around organizational culture. And in my mind, they flow in that order. So strategy and direction is the starting point, establishing your true north. Where are you going? And the first thing you need to determine is the difference between a craft and enterprise. I'm not going to go into that in detail now, but the concept is that the craft is very much about the individual craftsman, craftswoman who drive the organization, and the bulk of the skills in the particular service or in making the particular product are with that individual or that very close-knit group of individuals who formed the business. But what it means is the business doesn't have a value because all of the value is in the skills of the individuals. If you're building an enterprise, it's about the team. The team has the skills. It's not reliant on individuals. And the business is fundamentally built around the concept of shareholders, directors, and managers. So when you register a company, you have to determine who the shareholder or shareholders are, who the director or directors are. And then if it's an operational company, then you need to have some kind of manager to drive the business forward. So that's the concept in enterprise. So first step, decide which one you're going to build because they're fundamentally different. And then you get into the strategy. So what is this whole business all about? What is the promise? What are the promise you're making to the market? Other words for it, purpose, the why, the reason you are in existence. Then you've got your vision. What is the future? What does the picture look like for the next 3 to 5 years? Where are you going? The mission defines where you are right now and what the services and products are that you offer right now that will hopefully take you towards that vision and deliver the promise. And then you've obviously got the critical success factors and dependencies and your tracking of your strategic objectives that you need to have in place. So having been through that process and defined those key components of promise, vision, and mission, the next step is to work out whether the culture of the organization is actually driving those or not. So examples of promise, Microsoft, a computer on every desktop. So their goal and their promise to the world was to find a way, anyway, to put a computer on every desktop. And there were some issues about how hard they pushed, but that was their promise. They didn't break their promise. They just didn't necessarily do it in a particularly ethical way at some points. Disney, make people happy, create magic. So if Disney is not creating magic in the experience and engagement you have with them as a company, then they've broken their promise. So these are just examples that might help you understand the concept. As I said, watch the other webinar if you want to find out a little bit more, or obviously contact me or contact Sirdar and we can run workshops, etc., to help you with that. So what we're talking about now is that next segment is organizational culture. So what does it mean? The why. So thriving workplace cultures have employees who feel connected and inspired. So there's a lot of this talk about engagement. If you search for engagement, company engagement, all of those kind of things, there are myriad articles on this topic. And because it is so critical. If you have a strategy, but you don't have an engaged team, then you've got very little chance of actually developing and taking it forward. And if you have a culture that's a burnout culture rather than a constructive, supportive, helpful culture, then employees just literally burn out, and then they leave the organization. They just can't, they don't have the energy to continue. So it's critical that we get this culture thing right so that we have employees, team members that are engaged so that we can deliver on the promise to our clients. And the scary statistics. So this was a Gallup poll. I'm not sure exactly what year it was. I forgot to make a note of it, where they said the global marketplace, they did a complete survey of how engaged different employees were across different countries, and these percentages varied. But the really scary one was that 17% of employees in sub-Saharan Africa are engaged in the workplace. 83% are not engaged. So we think about the waste of that situation. If we are spending R1 million a year or whatever it might be on staff, and 80% of those staff are not engaged, that's thousands and thousands and thousands of rand that we are wasting because we're not getting the best out of our people. They haven't bought into what we're trying to achieve. They're not involved and engaged with where we're going and supporting and helping the business to take that forward. And how big a difference does that make? So this is an 11-year study that Heskell and Cotter did in 1992, a little bit old, but the data is absolutely relevant. They took 12 firms with performance enhancing cultures based on their criteria, and 20 firms that they found without a performance enhancing culture. Interesting that they managed to find a lot more without the performance enhancing culture for the survey. But the difference in revenue growth over those 11 years was absolutely astounding. So 682% for those that did have a performance enhancing culture versus 166% for those that didn't. Employment growth, more jobs. We have to get this culture right in order to grow our businesses, and we have to grow our businesses so we can employ more people. Africa is struggling with millions who are unemployed. The situation in South Africa particularly is desperate in terms of how many people are unemployed. So we have to take that mantle as directors, as business owners, as founders. We need to make sure that we are doing everything we possibly can to create meaningful jobs for a meaningful purpose so that we can employ more people and change society. And if you're just looking at the shareholder perspective, 900% growth in stock price versus 74%. That's just crazy. And net income growth, 700% versus 1%. So that percentage of unengaged staff members really makes a difference to your net income. It makes a difference to your profitability, because that's your bottom line. If you can increase your the engagement of your team by 1 or 2%, you can potentially double or triple your profit, because you're suddenly getting something for nothing. It goes straight to the bottom line. So Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. But it's clear he didn't mean that just strategies are unimportant, but rather if you get the culture right, you get an empowering culture right, then you've got a much surer route to organizational success. You're much more likely to be able to deliver on your strategy, to take the business forward and take action on that strategy, because you've got far better engagement with your team. And I saw this one recently, I thought was great. Strategy and culture should have breakfast together. Yes, absolutely. You need to work together. If you don't have a clear strategy, you can have the best culture in the world, you're not going anywhere. You can have the fantastic strategy, but if you don't have a good high-performing culture, then you're not going to go anywhere. The two work hand in hand. So who is responsible? So a quote from Traversing the Avalanche. We've actually got a link to a chapter 8. So I don't know if you can see that, Traversing the Avalanche. That's mirror, it doesn't really help you. Traversing the Avalanche book. We'll be sending a link for a chapter 8, which is on organizational culture as an ebook. So by all means read that, and there's a little bit more detail, obviously, on organizational culture. But the responsibility for both the culture of the board and the organization as a whole sits squarely with the board. So the board, the directors, whether you like it or not, you are the leaders in the organization. The organization is going to look up to you, and particularly with culture, it's going to follow your lead. And you don't have to look too far on newspapers or anywhere else for that matter, just talking to friends, where the culture of the leadership has been misplaced, or is just not there at all, or is not being driven, or not clear. There's some problem with the culture of leadership, and the whole organization becomes affected, and in some cases becomes infected. So it's really critical that as a board and as directors, we take responsibility for culture, because at the end of the day, it is our responsibility. And the organization is looking up to the board to see how we act, and then taking that forward and using it as their basis, their framework for the way they act within the organization. So good, great directors grow companies, but great directors change lives. And it's particularly important with this cultural aspect, because we want to make sure, as I said earlier, that we are building the organization so that it employs more people, because if we employ more people, there are more people earning a living, which means their families are better supported, which means their communities are better supported. And then further, other businesses, that money multiple happens, and other businesses benefit because there's more money in circulation. So it fundamentally changes lives if we get this right. And South Africa has been very strong on stakeholder engagement, not just making sure that a company pays shareholders, as it is definitely more focused on in the States. So again, you've got a much broader context which you're operating in, and a much broader potential to influence your communities, the suppliers, your clients, your staff, the environment, all kinds of aspects that would be counted under stakeholder engagement. So how bad is it? Well, the first thing, I suppose, is to check your company. And this is a short sort of question we have in one of our surveys in our high performance board workshop, but it also appears in the applied directorship program, really just to check in for people to say, well, how well mobilized is our culture? How well aware are we of what our culture is? So there is clarity in the organization's culture, values, and beliefs. So clarity means that it's written down. Clarity means that everybody in the organization knows what your values and beliefs are and the general organizational culture. It's clear. You can speak to the person on the shop floor and they will give you one rendition of your values, and you can speak to management and they will give you the same rendition of values if it is well disseminated through the organization and there is full clarity. It's fully in place. Culture and values of the organization are demonstrated by the board. That's where it must start. Are they demonstrating that leadership? And is it clear the way they're demonstrating the values to the rest of the organization? The board creates a culture for itself to operate by. So it may be that the board's holding itself to an even higher set of values than the rest of the organization needs to live up to, because they've determined that if we don't excel and act as a really high performance unit, then again, we're just not going to get the potential from this business that it possibly can. Board's conduct is characterized by trust, respect, candor, professionalism, accountability, diligence, and commitment. So very specifically, the board has values that it needs to subscribe to, it needs to demonstrate. And trust is obviously absolutely key. Respect for each other, respect for subordinates, respect for the organization as a whole, candor, so speaking up. We'll talk a little bit more about the role of the director and how being that lone voice and saying, no, this is not right, or we need to stop this because we're going in the wrong direction, or whatever it might be, is critically important. Is that candor is absolutely essential. To demonstrate professionalism, accountability, to be diligent, to make sure that you're actually reading the papers, you're digging into it, you're doing some research, you understand what's happening in the business, and be fully committed. So as a director, it's not as and when we have a meeting commitment. It's 24/7. You don't switch off from being a director. And the organization has developed a culture of accountability for performance. So do you have an accountability for performance? It needs to be part of your culture. It needs to be part of your systems. It needs to be part of the way you manage the operations of your business. So all of those pieces fall under organizational culture. And the scary thing was, and it wasn't even our research, this is Culture as a Corporate Asset report. Only 50% of directors say they understand the collective behaviors, norms, and values at the front lines of their organizations. Just let that sink in. Only 50% of directors say they understand the norms at the front lines. That's just understand them. When you dig into have they actually done anything actively to change them or actively to communicate what the organization requires, to do some training, et cetera, those percentages just shrink. So the critical piece, and why we are so passionate about doing education at Sirdar, is we see this kind of thing happening all the time, where the board is just disconnected from the rest of the organization. And they're going in opposite directions and they're wondering why the strategy is not effective, why the organization is not growing, why it's not profitable, etc. So other piece of the survey, how confident are you that the culture desired by the board and that which actually exists at all levels of business are one and the same? So just picking one of these, we do not have much information on the culture that actually exists, and so are unclear on the alignment between the desired and actual cultures, 32%. And on the other side, very confident. We consider the matter in detail and there is clear alignment, 5%. So just in this survey, and I think it's pretty good representation of most companies that are operating in most countries, that there are very few boards that are very confident that they consider the matter in detail and there's clear alignment. Where is organizational culture on your agenda for the year? Where is organizational culture as a strongly discussed and debated topic on your annual calendar as a board? So how do we do this? So a strong culture, one of which members agree upon and care intensively about organizational values. So we need to work out what our organizational values are. Can improve business performance by getting everybody to buy into the promise. So we've talked about the promise and we've talked about coordinating the behavior towards a vision. So you've done your strategy bit. You've hopefully come up with a robust promise that everybody's starting to buy into. So you need to communicate that promise. You then need to communicate your vision. You need to try and do internal marketing to get buy-in for your promise and your vision so that everybody at least understands this is where you're going. And then have conversations with everyone in the organization through the different structures of management to say, right, this is where we're going. This is our promise, this is a vision. What do you understand by this? Clarify that, tidy that up, make sure everybody understands where we're going. And if someone doesn't believe in that promise or believe in that vision, then that's a conversation you need to have too. Because if as leaders, we're committed to taking a business in a particular direction, we need to make sure that everyone's on board. And if they're not on board, then we need to help them find somewhere else where they are more in alignment with that promise, those values, etc. And then you've obviously got to measure what are your organizational values now, and then relate them to what you think and believe the organizational values need to be in order to take your strategy forward, so that you can make a plan as a board in how do we get from A to B. So it starts with, as I said, promise, vision, and values. So get those right, and now you have the building blocks. So guiding values, what are the most important values that undergird the business? They determine your approach to challenges you face. So this starts with unpicking or unpacking what we currently do. So you need to start with an understanding of now, because you can't force a new culture on someone without having an understanding how far you've got to shift. So that you can, because culture takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus to change it. So it's critical that you really understand what are our values right now. So start with the values of the individual leaders. There's various tests you can do, there's various questionnaires you can run through to try and unpack what your individual personal values are, things that you value, things that you believe are important. Things like, is business absolutely one of my top values? If I walk into a bookshop, they're the first books I'll look at and see. The fact that I'll even see the bookshop ahead of any other book, any other store in a mall is also an indication that, okay, that's probably true. Business is somewhere near the top of your values list. Is family there, or is family the most important, which is what's causing problems in the business, because you're spending much more time with the family than with the business, and the business is suffering as a result. Is that okay? Or do you need to change your role? Or do you need to make some kind of changes that will allow you to spend that much time with your family, et cetera, et cetera. So it's about what you value. It's not just the honesty, integrity, et cetera, which are critical, but they're linked to and are much more reinforced by what you personally think is important. So if you think travel's important, how does that relate to, and how does that support the business? If you think family, as I said, is important, how does that support and how does it relate to the business? Because it shows up really quickly. If you as a leader think, oh, family is wonderful, and our business organizational culture is all about putting family first, and the first time anybody tries to take leave for any exceptional circumstance, their child's sick or whatever, you stop it, then you're not living those values. So it's what are the values, or what you need to talk to the members of your team to unpack. What is the reality? What do we really talk about? How do we really approach challenges? How do we communicate with each other, etc.? So these must be common to all. So ask everyone the same question, and you should be getting the same answer if you're consistent. So there's some work to do here, because you may find different levels of the organization are working with a different value set, and it's just not cohesive and coordinated, and it's not, there isn't that common thread through all. And these must be expressed in such a way to be able to guide. So it guides your decision making. So one of the reasons why the promise is so important. When you're thinking of doing a new activity, the first question is, does it fit with our promise? So for example, Sirdar's promise is meaningful economic impact. So if we're working with a client and we don't believe we can support that company to grow and make an impact, and particularly an economic impact, well, then there's probably going to be misalignment. If we're saving them, then maybe there's someone else who can do better. If we're helping them grow and supporting them to do something really special, then that's a much better alignment. So it starts to help you make choices about which suppliers you should work with, which clients you should work with, which members of the team you should bring in, and which members of the team you should let go. So promise is a really critical place to start. As we've said, then the vision going forward, is everybody buying into that vision, or are they just, it's just not something they want to do? And then you start looking at the values themselves. But it's got to be clear, and it's got to be easily expressed in order to guide people's behavior and guide people's actions. And then come up with 3 to 5 values that we really, really believe in. So having said 3 to 5 values, I was very interested to see that Zappos, which is regarded as one of the sort of leaders in this, the importance of culture space, has 10 core values. So they've very clear, I mean, if you look at this list, there are not many organizations that would have these values on their list, but it's the way they act. It's the way they present to the world. So delivering wow, creating fun. Their workspaces are a little bit weird. They're definitely a strong focus on fun. They're adventurous, they're creative. They do things differently. They're pursuing the growth and learning within their staff, et cetera, et cetera. So their values are weird, wacky. They are Zappos values. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be the same values for another organization, but they are very clear on them, and they make absolutely certain that everybody that's in the organization buys into them right from the first interview. Other examples of boards I've been working with recently. So climb as a team. Now, a lot of these values need to are contextual to your particular company. So if your value is climb as a team, how does that differ from someone who's maybe sweeping the floor in a factory versus someone who's sitting in the executive team? How does that show up? So you need to start adding descriptions, stories, ways of explaining to different people throughout the organization what that means. How do we work together as a team? So climb as a team is one of the Sirdar's promises, and it links to our brand. So our brand is about mountains and conquering mountains, and like a business growing and developing, and Sirdar is the lead Sherpa on the mountain expedition, holding your hand to take you to the summit. We are climbing because we are Sirdars as a team. So the words need to be part of your culture, but they also need to be part of your brand as far as possible, etc. So everything ties together and is as cohesive as possible. Honor our promises. So it's not just about being honest. It's about, I've made a promise, either as an organization to the market, or as an individual to a colleague, or as an individual to a client, and I must honor that promise. It's fairly easy to measure whether you failed or not. It's fairly easy to have that conversation at all levels of organization to say, this is what we're about. If we're going to make a promise, we must understand, is it reasonable? Is it deliverable? Is the timing appropriate? Have I actually got the authority to make that promise? So it talks to a whole bunch of areas of activity, but it's linked to the moment I open my mouth and say, I will, you're making a promise. And you need to understand what the implications are as an organization, as an individual, and talk about it. And as I said, have stories and examples that you share in the organization. Take ownership. So what does that mean? Some organizations, it's very clear, it's about responsibility. In other organizations, it might mean that you're engaged with the client as if you own that client. And the organization is built around supporting you in that that space of effectively owning that client, etc. So the word may be used in multiple contexts, but it's going to have a very specific meaning in a specific organization. And that's why it's so important that it's properly communicated, properly documented, and it becomes part of an internal marketing strategy and approach to make sure that it's understood. And people coming from different contexts, different socio and economic stages and experience, then this needs to be explained. You can't make assumptions that people are going to understand a particular word or phrase in the same way. And as we touched on before, values of a board are very specific. You need to make sure that as a board, the organization trusts you, trusts you're making the right decisions for the organization, trusts that you're actually thinking things through, and you're not putting other conflicts of interest ahead of the business as a whole. You're taking care, you're respecting each other, you're respecting the organization, you're respecting other people that you work with and deal with. As I said, candor, professionalism, diligence, commitment. Those values are very definitely for a board, but may or may not be something that you have on your list for the rest of your team. You might have others that are more relevant to the rest of the team. And I mentioned, and I noticed I mentioned somewhere in one of the difference between culture and diversity. So diversity is about the variety. So have you got a culture that allows the variety? Or is your culture driving an organization where everybody looks the same, sounds the same, does the same, comes from the same places, has the same education, etc.? There's many examples across all kinds of cultures and across every country in the world where there are businesses that are predominantly Indian employees, and that's the way it's built. There are businesses which are predominantly Afrikaans employees, and that's the way it's built. We need to start thinking about cultures that allow and support a little bit more variety, because what happens is we miss the context, we miss the engagement, we miss the input from those other contexts, those other cultures, those other, whether it's male or female, young or old, ethnic backgrounds, different religions, all of those things bring a flavor to the organization that it's really difficult to get any other way. And unless you are selling to only one particular niche of clients, and therefore your entire organization is in alignment with that niche, which is possible, but is likely to be fairly exceptional. If that's the case, then fine, you can work with less variety. But as soon as you start to talk to a more broader society, you need to have more variety so you understand their needs, you understand their wants. And frankly, from working on many boards, the more diversity that you have in the way of thinking in the boardroom, the better decisions you make. Because otherwise we just end up in this group think. We're all saying and doing the same thing. We all have the same set of experiences. We all have the same sort of similar education. We end up coming to the same conclusions. And because we know the way each of us think, we don't actually stop and dig into things enough because it just flows, and that's the decision. We haven't really unpacked it as much as we should and tested assumptions and looked at for other different angles, etc. So it's critical, if not anywhere else in the organization, that you start to think about this diversity question as what variety do we have in the board? What variety of ways of thinking, of experiences are we bringing to the board so we make better decisions? And one of them is profile. So often we end up in a team of people that are like us. And what that typically means is that we think in a similar way, which means we have a lot in common. But again, we're not necessarily challenging each other, and we're definitely not covering for our weaknesses. We're playing to our strengths, and we're perpetuating those strengths where we're not building a team that makes sure we cover all the bases. So one of the tools that we use is Contribution Compass. There are many out there. This one particularly is based on I Ching, and originally basically everything went back to the Chinese philosophy from over 2,000 years ago called I Ching. That's with an I, Ching, C-H-I-N-G. So look it up, very interesting, which talks about everything to do with the seasons, energy flow, elements, etc., etc. So what we advocate is particularly at board level, that you have a blend of different personality profiles that bring different energy into the room, and they bring different perspectives. So on the Applied Directorship program, you get a profiler, you do the test, you get your report, and then we build the teams, we build the boards in that program according to that understanding, that methodology. But it makes such a difference if you get that blend. Yes, it may not be, we may not all be best mates, but we definitely cover each other's weaknesses. We definitely have an opportunity to play to each of our strengths and support each other to play to our strengths. And we just make better decisions and we work more effectively because we're covering off all of the bases. We're not just going off in one particular direction, which always has its shortcomings. And it also helps with communication. So if we understand each other better, we communicate better. We communicate much more effectively. So does this person need data to get across the idea? Or do they just need to talk it through and they need stories and examples of other people they might know who've been in a similar circumstance? Is it something they need to do that's new, that's interesting, it's that shiny new thing? Or is it much more about getting what we already do right and making sure the process is followed and that the customer's happy and that we're retaining them and we've got a long, consistent way of engaging with them, etc., which is that sustaining energy. So this is a critical piece in communication, but it's a critical piece in when you're building teams and thinking about the culture of the organization as a whole. So 5 elements of culture. I mean, this list is not a particular list to Sirdar. It's lists I've seen repeated many times on different parts of the internet. And purpose. So purpose, promise, why. Ownership. We saw it on some of the company values that they've quoted. It's about the value of ownership, of their accountability, the making sure we've got a process in place that does that. We've got a culture that allows people to make mistakes and take autonomy and responsibility for things they're doing. We need to build a community based on principles of consistency and common goals and values and all of those kind of things. We need to have effective communication, and that's built around processes, about the dynamics, understanding how we need to talk to each other, how we need to communicate with each other, what mechanisms we use. Is it voice? Is it email? What is it that we can best use to communicate effectively? And then absolutely, we need to be leaders. If we are directors, we are the leadership team. We need to demonstrate that. We need to demonstrate all of the aspects that we're expecting our staff and employees and whatever team members, whatever your designation is in your organization. We need to help and support the rest of our team by leading them in the right direction, leading them with authenticity, by being consistent, by being compassionate, by not being completely authoritarian, by leading through action. So what next? So before I go into the Applied Directorship Program and we answer any questions on that, the specifics, I just wanted to put up, well, just go through some of the questions. If you've got any questions on the Q&A, I see there's quite a few that have come up here. So let's just go some of the questions on culture specifically. And then if you're interested, and I'll spend the next 15, 20 minutes going through the Applied Directorship Program specifically, so you can get an understanding of how we go through all of those 8 elements of the governance compass, how we prepare you to be a better director and to be a new director, a new non-executive director. So we've got to me, when composing a board of directors for a company that had no board before, how important is it to be culturally diverse? So I would start with the end in mind. So it's important that you understand where you're going. I'll touch a little bit in a minute on what we call the high performance director and high performance board, because it gives context for the training. But start with the end in mind. Steve, what's his name? Kofi said start with the end in mind, yes. Be clear on what the ideal board looks like and then move in that direction. You may not be able to get there straight away. You may not be able to throw all of the directors out and start from scratch, but at least you know, okay, we're going to bring in someone who adds that flavor has that perspective. And next year, we're going to rotate so-and-so out, and we're going to bring in someone else who adds that perspective. So over time, and maybe it might be 3 to 5 years, you move into a place where you've got much more diversity in the board. How does a board monitor the culture of the organization? So there are all kinds of tools. The Gallup guys have various questionnaires that you can run. It's usually called an engagement survey. You could just have workshops. There's a infinite number of ways where you can actually do it. It's got to be relevant for your organization, but it's a process. So it's asking the people. How you ask the people then becomes the next step. Is it a questionnaire? Is it workshops in small groups? How do you do it? Is the next pass, and that'll depend on how big the organization is, how geographically disparate it is, etc. Balancing organizational culture versus individual culture and rights. So what I would advocate is, as a leadership team, start by understanding your values and the culture that you live by, the way you present yourself to the world, because that will, whether you know aware of it or not, will be having an influence on the organization. Then at least you've got an awareness of where the leadership team is starting from, so that when you start to dig into where the organization is coming from, then hopefully there'll be less surprises. And then you can look at, well, okay, what do we need to have as a culture? But ideally, as an organization, there should be a fairly close correlation between the value set of the employees and the value set that the organization is driving. Because if not, then you're going to be pulling in opposite directions. So it's critical that you work together. It's individual rights, culture, etc., work within the organizational context. And if they don't, then as an individual, you need to probably make a choice. You're either going to be quite miserable in that organization and not perform effectively, or you're going to need to find another organization somewhere else that's a better fit. Cultures that this is the way we do things around here. So if you don't like the way we do things around here, then there's going to be a disconnect. You're going to be disengaged. How does culture evolve from a startup owner managed to larger and across multiple geographies? It evolves a lot, but it often starts from an awareness. So as I said earlier, start with the founder. What are the value sets? What is the culture, the way they present themselves of the founder? Is the founder naturally good at helping and supporting people to grow? If not, then how do we compensate for that? How do we bring someone else into the team that's going to be good at that, so that the founder can then work on what they're better at? So it's important to think about what culture you need as early as possible. Similar to what is the promise of this organization? You need to think about that from one employee, because otherwise you're going to be going off in all kinds of directions with no clarity, no consistency, no focus. And it's going to take much longer for the organization to get going. I understand that startups, we do anything and everything we possibly can to get that back. But actually, the more focused you are on what it is we do and we will be best at, then the easier it is to take the organization forward. So I hope that's answered your question, Mohsin. Wonderful, thank you. That was all the questions on this list.
Tim,
so, yes,
so Tim, there's one more question that was emailed through.
Okay.
How often, if at all, should the culture of an organization change? What influences the regularity of culture change?
It'll depend on the environment, internally or externally or both. So if there is no reason for a culture to change because it is a good fit for the current market, the current situation, the current way the organization is performing, etc., then there's no real reason to change it. But what has become really apparent over the last year and a half with COVID is that culture is fairly easy to manage when you're all in the office. It's much more difficult to manage when you're not in the office. And if it's clear, then it's relatively straightforward. But if you've never actually written it down, trained on it, documented it, etc., it's much more difficult for people to understand what is the right way of doing something if they can't see other people in their immediate vicinity demonstrating those values and demonstrating the culture. So I would expect that if nothing else, most organizations have had a cultural review, a cultural audit, and started to think about how we train on the culture and how we manage against the culture, and how we, when we're having performance reviews, we start to ask questions related to culture, because everybody's so spread out, so disparate, and so on their own, they will just make it up for themselves. If you don't have direction, every individual will fill the gap. They'll fill the gap with what they think's right. So it needs to be really, really clear. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a million different permutations of what the organizational culture looks like. So it's typically, if there's been an external force that changes, then the culture may need to shift. But common good culture tends to perpetuate a growth mindset, clear communication, having a clear promise. All of those things can potentially be forever. They will just adapt to individuals and adapt to particular circumstances a little bit. But if you've got really strong core values, they shouldn't really need to change much at all.
We've got one more from Tumi. What are some ways to engage a positive workplace culture for an organization that had not established one before?
So that's why I said you need to dig into what does the existing culture look like, because otherwise you've got no clue what you're starting from. So it's similar to where we would do a diagnostic of someone's board. Until we know what's there and how it's currently operating, it's really difficult to know what to do next. So as I said, you need to start with the now. So start with a work group in a fairly safe environment where the team get on fairly well, for example, to work out what their understanding is of the culture. It might pop up some red flags, you know, oh, geez, we need to talk about that. We need to deal with that before we take it any further. And then you start spreading out those working groups so that hopefully you've encompassed the whole organization. You now have a really clear picture of where the gaps are, where the misunderstandings are, where the dangerous cultural elements are that you need to now move forward and root out and change behavior to fix. But yeah, it's like anything. You need to start with a diagnostic before you can issue the prescription. Cool. Okay, so we've got 10 minutes. I'll go very quickly through this. So high performance director is one that's obsessed with creating meaningful economic impact. And furthermore, such a director is not afraid to have the tough conversations as well as do the mundane aspects. So it's really important, and why we developed this training program, to give directors confidence to have the tough conversations. If you don't know what you can and can't say, you don't know what you can and can't do in the boardroom, it's going to be much more difficult. So we want to fill in as many gaps as possible, which is why we've got an 11-month training program, not a 2-month training program or a 3-week training program. It's important to go through and live and experience and test all of those different aspects so that you walk into the boardroom with confidence and say, this is what we have to do. And that's when that soul voice makes all the difference in a board meeting, is when you go into that conversation with confidence. You can back up your argument. You can say, look, referring to the Companies Act here, it says this. We're not doing that. We're going to get in big trouble if we don't do something about it now. And the mundane aspect is understanding that preparing for board meetings takes time. Putting together board papers, if you're an executive director, takes time, and it needs skill, and there's a bit of a craft to it, and it's a repetitive habit and learning experience. So again, the training program is 8 board meetings to help and support you to build those habits, rather than a quick intensive week where you've forgotten about most of it a week or a month later. The high performance board is the piece where it holds the company accountable to performance standard higher than ever had before. So if you're not operating as a director at a higher standard, then how on earth are you going to be able to hold the company accountable to a higher standard? And if you can get to the point where the board is really holding the accountable, then it just creates so much more space and momentum and impetus for the company to shift. And we've seen companies shift dramatically in short space of time, just because we've started to get that accountability right, and the focus on the particular key areas starts to come right. And that starts from us understanding the board level. So the course is based on 8 modules, as I talked about before, or 8 board meetings that I talked about before. And in each of those sections, those modules, you talk about these different aspects of the governance compass. So we'll have a board meeting where the topics of the board meeting and the learning materials on the Moodle platform and the reading you do is about strategy and direction. And then you move to the next module where it's about organizational culture. So by the end of that period, you've experienced a board meeting, you've got an enormous amount of videos, reading and everything else on a particular topic. So you've got an understanding of what your responsibility is related to that topic. And then the other modules either end are two introduction modules at the beginning, and then one closeout module at the end, where everybody gets a chance to share a bit of their learnings. But the fundamental core of this program is built around this governance compass and those 8 segments. So leadership and governance, continual work in process. If we're not learning every day about how to be a better leader or how to govern better, then we're just not going to be able to keep up. We're just going to get left behind. So if someone comes to me and said, no, but I've been a director for 20 years, I know how to do this stuff. Being a director 20 years ago is nothing like being a director now. In fact, being a director now is very different from being a director even 10 years ago. So we have to be continually learning and unlearning the behaviors that will help us and support us to get better and become a better and more high performance director. So we have to be continually doing programs, doing workshops, reading books to make sure that we are keeping up to date with best thinking and best practice. So just as a quick high level, Sirdar Group is a leader in education, appointment and guide of boards. That's what we do. That's all we do. We only work with directors and boardrooms. And we've been doing it for 12 years now. So we've talked to hundreds of companies. And I know I really tested the methodology when I came in 2013. I thought, no, I can do this better, do that better, whatever we are now. 8 years later, I actually firmly believe that the methodology is rock solid. So believe me, I've tested it and pushed it and stretched it and done everything I can to try and break it since I've been in the organization, and have failed miserably. In fact, all that happens, I just end up implementing it more and more and more closely to the original methodology. So personally, I've learned that this stuff is robust and it works and it makes a difference. And the other aspects of the business that we've now, as I said, we've got a contribution compass profiling tool. We've got links with Onboard that do board software, and we've got specific divisions in the training, which is what we're talking about now, appointment of directors and a database that you can put your name down on if you're interested, and then the team that does the company secretarial and the board guidance process, the ongoing hand-holding of a board over a period of time. So the program is about doing. We don't want to just give you a book and expect you to understand it. Just like climbing a mountain, you can't learn how to climb a mountain by doing the degree. You have to actually get out there and do it. And directors are no different. You need to be in a boardroom. You need to be spending time practically running and having board meetings to get an understanding of how this stuff works. And it requires time, energy, and it requires guidance. None of us know everything. So we need a pool of people that we can tap into to ask questions. We need reference material we can go back to check on understanding. And that's what the supply direction program is really striving to achieve. You've got the support of the Sirdar team, but you're in a team of classmates that the idea is you're all directors or aspiring directors. You want to support each other. You want to share your experience with each other. You want to learn together. You want to question the material together, debate the material together. So it's really critical component to put that time and energy in and get the guidance and share the guidance so that we all grow and move to a completely different level. It's broken down, just before I get there, one question that comes up a lot is what's the difference between an MBA and the Applied Directorship Program? And the fundamental difference is we are training directors, whereas an MBA is typically training managers, training people to be CEOs. They're different. They have different requirements, different needs, different roles. So that's what we are focused on, is developing directorship. If you want to be a better director, then the Applied Directorship Program is for you. If you want to be a better manager, then I'd consider doing an MBA, and each has its time and place. And it's not a one-week program, as I talked about. We need it to be extended so that you build habits. You try and make mistakes and learn and try it again, and make mistakes and learn and try it again. You need time in the saddle. And it's not just theory, it's about theory and simulation. So we run simulated board meetings with a company simulation package. That means that you have financials that change based on the levers that pull the decisions you've made in the meetings. So it's 11 modules. As I said, the first module is an introduction to the concepts. What are the types of directors? What are the duties? What are the different hats of director, shareholder, manager, etc. Second module introduces contribution compass and how you build a board. What is the way? How do you construct it? How do you select directors? How do the sort of processes around it work? And then module 3, you start getting into the governance compass, and you have your first meeting as this constructed team within the group, within the cohort. You have this first meeting based on strategy and direction. So we take the cohort, maximum 20 people, and we break them down into boards. So you've got 4 or 5 people in each board. And then for the duration of the rest of the course, so module 3 onwards, you operate as a board, having board meetings. And you're competing against each other using the simulated software to see what results your decisions have made on your company versus the results of the other companies in this ecosystem. So it just gamifies it a bit, makes it highly competitive, makes it very frustrating, etc. But it makes it a little bit more real. It's not quite so much of a theoretical academic exercise. You're actually doing something with the material and actually getting feedback. Then you move on to organizational culture, which we talked about today. Module 5 is about chief executive performance and all to do with leadership. Then stakeholder engagement, shareholder expectations, risk tolerance, that compliance piece, which is typically all people see, but it's just one of 8 segments. And then financials, how do you construct financials? What reporting is effective at board level? What structuring around the financial planning of the business do you need to be aware of, budget setting, etc. And then the last formal section of a board meeting is around evaluating the board. How did your board perform? What could you do better? So again, you've got an understanding of what a board evaluation looks like. And the 11th section is a feedback session. So as I said, we use the contribution compass profiling tool. In this, we build the boards based on getting a blend of profiles around the room in your board. So you'll get to experience that. We go through all 8 segments of the the governance compass as part of the dynamic. 11 months in total, maximum of 20 in a cohort, which means we end up with 3 or 4 boards of directors in a cohort. You've got 8 simulated board meetings, and it's about 4 hours per month in the session, in the online session, either morning or an afternoon cohort. And our estimate is it probably takes 3 to 4 hours per week for preparation, online learning, watching the videos, reading the books, etc. So if you can put a Sunday afternoon aside or a couple of evenings during the week, then you should be able to get the material done. But any less than that, then you end up cramming at the end, which is not ideal. And what is really critical is that you're with a network of like-minded individuals. You're going to meet a lot of people. Even if it is online, you get a chance to engage with them and share ideas with them, which means you've got a network that you can tap into during the course and after the course. What you get is a certificate of attendance and competence. And we'll go through, skip past this bit, and just to reiterate that this is not a guarantee. So yes, we have a database. Yes, we do board appointments, but just because you've done the training, unfortunately, doesn't guarantee that you'll get an appointment, because it's like a new career. It depends on your network, your energy, your focus, your original skill set, etc. Location even, about whether you're likely to get an appointment. But this program certainly helps, and Sirdar will do whatever it can to try and help you. So our invitation, join the program, challenge your thinking, improve your prospects, begin the journey as a high performance director. And as Buffett says, the best investment is in yourself. So this is the program as it stands now. There are different variations locally, so please get in touch with whoever you saw the invite from. If you're struggling to get hold of anybody, then by all means contact me. My telephone number is on the little window, the video, and you can get my number just by replying to the email you'll be sent immediately after this webinar. So if you're interested, let us know. Click on the link, which will come through in the follow-up email. If you're interested in clicking on the link now, then you can go to bit.ly ADP online, and you comes up with the application form. We then review the applications, determine that you will be able to contribute. In other words, you have enough experience as an executive or as a director to contribute to the group. We want to make sure that everybody's participating equally. And then we'll send you a deposit and take it from there. But as I said, for specific countries, there are different price points. So please get in touch with whoever you got the original link from, or contact myself, Tim Holmes at sirdargroup.com, or reply to the email that you receive immediately after this webinar. So I'm just going to put up a poll. Sally, if you can just put up the poll on what you would like your next steps to be, just gives us an idea of whether you wish us to follow up. So call us about the ADP, call me about a 30-minute consult. So I'm happy to do free consults with, if you're not sure where you're at, what you need, what help you might need in terms of your career or the board. I'm happy to do a consult. Just let us know. Any indication of anything about other training programs, again, happy to provide information. Director Network, we can send you the link. Otherwise, you can see the link on the website. And if there's anything else you're interested in, guide services, finding directors, etc., let us know, and we'll follow up and make sure that you're given all the information you require. And if none of those apply, then thank you for attending anyway. I hope that you learned something. I hope that it was useful. I hope you're walking away with a better understanding of what organizational culture means. And we'll be giving you, as I said, chapter 8 of Traversing the Avalanche. So that'll also, the link to that will also be in the follow-up email, so you can download it and read it. And again, have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful week, and all the best with whatever happens next in your journey to becoming a high-performance director. So we'll end the presentation now. Thank you very much.